to the first episode of Heroes in the Making, a channel dedicated to helping fellow tabletop role players create dynamic backstories designed to make your characters more interesting, fun, and easy to run. Thank you for joining me. I'm your lore weaver, Nikki, and tabletop role-playing games are one of my passions. After playing them for over 20 years, I found one of my favorite things about them, other than role-playing itself, is the thrill of making new characters and writing their backstories. I'm excited to use my experience and share ideas and advice to help players like you, new and veterans, put together awesome backstories so you have a more fulfilling and enjoyable experience in the games you play. This advice should work from your good old-fashioned dungeon crawls to your epic roleplay heavy campaigns. Now recently, I've mostly been playing Dungeons & Dragons 5e, but much of what I'll be sharing is universal for most other role-playing games also. Since this is my first episode, it only makes sense to start at the very beginning. What actually is a backstory? Well, the easy definition is the story you create to describe where your character comes from and why they are the way they are. But a backstory is so much more than that. It can define why you play a character a certain way, like why your half-orc barbarian feels closer to their human side than the orc, or why your dwarven rogue loves a certain flower and goes out of their way to preserve them. It can be happy, it can be tragic, it can be as detailed as their favorite color, what food they hate, who their secret crush is back home. Honestly, it's up to you just how far you want to go with it. You could simply create bullet points, or you could be like me and hand over 6 pages to your DM. No matter how you do it, it's important to understand just how essential backstories are to character creation. In today's video, I'm going to cover some reasons why I feel your character's backstory is important not only for you, but your DM, your fellow players, and the campaign or story you're telling together. This list is by no means definitive, but it's what has stood out to me as I've played over the years. Let's start with you, the player. It is your backstory, but why exactly should it be important to you? Well, for starters, it helps you understand your character better and where you've come from. Where did you grow up? Were your parents alive? Do you have siblings? For that matter, were you the oldest? Youngest? Were you the middle child? Did you have money? The answer to these questions and many more could be important to how you play your character. Look at it this way. When an actor first gets a script, they also get instructions on how the director wants them to play that character. Well, you're your own director here, with the help of your DM, of course. You get to decide how you want to play your character, and your backstory is a bit of a roadmap to get you there.
Or what you call guideline.
There are 3 really good questions to think about as you're creating your character's roadmap. First, what's your motivation? Were you kidnapped as a child, so you're trying to find your parents and will travel with those whom you think might be able to protect you? Were you a bored princess who ran away for a life of adventure, so you'll join any party you think seems fun or like you're on an interesting journey? Do you want to be rich, so you're looking for treasure? Second, why are you adventuring? Were you brought up destitute in the streets and are desperate to make some coin to survive, so you've become a bounty hunter and travel the world seeking out your quarry? Are you the 3rd son of a noble with no inheritance who wanted to set out to make your own fortune and prove to your parents you can make it on your own? Was your farm destroyed by a dragon and now you have nowhere to go, but you're a hard worker, so you'll go where a job can be found? Were you treated as a servant by your step-siblings, so you ran away with a prince? Wait, I've seen that one. Third, what are your goals? Why does your dwarven rogue preserve those special flowers? Were they her mom's favorite? Or do they just remind him of home? Perhaps they were the only flowers the love of their life was able to keep alive before they were brutally murdered by pirates, and now you're out for revenge on every pirate you meet.
Murdered by pirates is good.
Or maybe you just want to find your lost grandfather, recover an ancient artifact stolen from your village, or simply discover who you are through a life of adventure. All this can be mapped out in your character's history or backstory. Your backstory is also important to you because it gives you a starting point for character growth if you're playing in a longer campaign-style game, a campaign miniseries, or even a one-shot. Whether you're playing a fresh-faced young adult leaving home for the first time, or an experienced soldier who's seen far more than their share of bloodshed, there should be room for growth. Some of the more interesting heroes and villains in the movies or on TV are those who, for better or worse, grow and make some sort of change in their lives to reflect that. Think Luke Skywalker, Neville Longbottom, or even Willow from Buffy the Vampire Slayer, who went from straight to lesbian to witchcraft to the BB-EG of Season 6 back to White Willow who saves the world in Season 7. Spoilers? That's not to say characters who stay the same aren't interesting to watch. Think James Bond, Indiana Jones, or Sherlock Holmes. It's up to you on the agenda you have for your character's growth or lack thereof. In a future video, we'll be going over the different types of characters you can create in more detail. And we'll compare things like static versus dynamic, flat versus round. We'll also go over how each type might fit into your playstyle and the story you're telling with your DM. Speaking of your DM, now that we've shown why it's important to you to have a great backstory, let's talk about why it's important to your dungeon master. First and foremost, being comfortable communicating with your DM is crucial to the entire table to ensure everyone is having a good time. Creating a good backstory is a perfect opportunity for you and your DM to build trust and have that communication. You can work together to create a character you're happy with who fits into the DM's world. It gives you the chance to let the DM know things you may want for your character as a player, discuss character secrets, and figure out how you can accomplish your character's goals together. This gives your DM the chance to come alongside you and develop ways for you to grow your character in the direction you want it to go. They can really hammer out the fine details with you to ensure they can give your character the attention it deserves in the story. On a more serious note, it also lets you and your DM have an honest discussion on things you may not want to see in the game, things that might ruin the fun for you. SodaWax made an entire video on D&D safety tools and how they can be used to enhance your game. So I'm not going to do a video on that in the future, but I will link hers. She does such an amazing job on this. It's definitely worth a watch. Now that we've touched on that, we can move on to the fun part. The biggest reason your backstory is important to your DM. When your DM knows your character's motivation and goals, where your character comes from, knows your backstory, they can use it to make a more personal, interesting, and engaging story for you. They can create a situation where you're engaged, you're listening, and you want to find out more information. I remember a time someone I put into my own backstory was mentioned at the table. It instantly grabbed my attention and pulled me into the story. I started sweating, my heart started beating fast, my blood was pumping. It was intense. Moments like that are so memorable. I have to share one of my favorite examples of this is in Campaign 1 of Critical Role, when Taliesin Jaffe reacts to hearing Matt say the name Briarwood for the first time.
Get these to Lady and Lord Briarwood as soon as possible, thank you. All right, so, first of all, I want to welcome you all back.
Just the mention of that name kicked off an entire arc centered around his character Percy, and that arc was so well loved they created the entire animated series around it. You, the other players, and the DM can tell a better story if all the players at the table are personally invested in it. That's so important, I'm going to repeat it. You, the other players, and the DM can tell a better story if all players are personally invested in it. Your backstory can help that happen by giving your DM the tools and hooks they need to pull everyone in. As a reminder, not all DMs are the same, and you may find one who doesn't use your backstory at all. That doesn't make their DM style wrong, they may just have a different process. You'll still have the chance to communicate with them and build that trust I mentioned. Your backstory just takes on a more personal importance for you and how you develop your character. If this does happen, I still suggest you make one for yourself. It never hurts to have a roadmap handy in the car, even if you do have a GPS. You never know when you might need it when interacting with other players. And that leads me into my third and final point, why a backstory is important to the other players at the table and the story you're telling together. D&D, Pathfinder, 7th Sea, and all the others aren't called role-playing games for nothing. Role-playing is obviously a big part of these games, and the fun of playing them. Imagine you're sitting at the table playing D&D and your party decides to enter a magic shop. You're browsing through the shelves on your own and you see a silver ring and set with a star ruby. The exact same ring your mother was wearing when she disappeared 5 years ago. Wait, the whole reason you're adventuring, your motivation, your goal is to find your mother. You feel your stomach drop as the DM describes it and catches your eye, so you know it's hers without a doubt now. You succeed on that Arcana check and see it's magically protected against theft. You can't get to it. Your party members are oblivious. You haven't been traveling with them long, so you really don't know a whole lot about each other except the bard because she never stops talking. You want that ring. You want information about that ring at the very least, and now you get to decide if disclosing your closely guarded secrets to the party is worth it to follow the roadmap you set for yourself in, you guessed it, your backstory. This type of situation opens up a great opportunity to roleplay for you and everyone else at the table. So how do you handle this? Do you blurt out your questions about the ring to the shopkeeper in front of everyone and deal with questions from your party later? Do you sneak away that night to speak to the shopkeeper privately? You could get to keep your secrets, but you risk getting caught leaving by a party member. You may have to roleplay to defend your decision to go somewhere on your own. Or do you ask your party for help and tell them everything? And what if, by doing so, you find your backstory may be intertwined with another player's somehow, and now someone else is interested in you and your character's story? This is also one way your backstory helps the DM get other players invested in your history, or you in theirs, as well as the overall campaign. Your backstory can create interpersonal relationships within the party and strengthen the bond between you and your party members, or even create some interesting in-character conflict, as long as everyone's comfortable with that. Remember what happened when Iron Man Tony Stark finds out Captain America's best friend Bucky or the Winter Soldier had a large part to play in his personal backstory? Hey, no spoilers this time. Simply put, your backstory is important to the other players and the story because you are a team working collaboratively to tell that story. And if every player has their own backstory, their own goals and motivations, then each one of those backstories is a way to bring everyone at the table together to work towards a common goal, promoting in and out of character teamwork and problem solving. Who says D&D can't be put on your resume? One last point I want to make. Just because you write a backstory at character creation, that doesn't mean it's finished. You can continue to flesh it out over time through gameplay. Sam Riegel did this with his character Not the Brave in Campaign 2 of Critical Role. He took an on-the-fly idea of not being afraid of water and made it a vital piece of her history. Remember to work with your DM, but if it makes sense, don't be afraid to add it in later on. So there you have it, folks. Several reasons why I think a character's backstory is a crucial part of its creation for you, your DM, your party, and the overall story. I'd love to hear how your DMs have pulled you personally into the game by using your backstory in the comments below. Or if you are a DM, leave me a comment on what you look for in a player's backstory. If you found this video helpful, come back and see me for my next one. I'll be going over different strategies you can use to create your backstory and explore several of the more common things my personal DMs look for to help them weave a character's past into their story. In the future, I'll have that video on different types of characters I mentioned earlier, and I'm really looking forward to creating a deep dive series on how using backgrounds from the Player's Handbook and other D&D 5e sourcebooks can help you write your backstory. I'll be spotlighting different ones over several videos and give you ideas on how to incorporate some of the more difficult options on the tables into your character and roleplay. Hit those like and subscribe buttons so you don't miss them. Until next time, remember, I'm your lore weaver Nikki, and I've got your backstories.